Good evening. What time is it? Welcome. So for the speakers tonight, I was instructed that we need to speak into the microphone because they're recording it, so we'll have to figure out how to do that. But welcome everybody. It's lovely to have you here. This is the 11th annual Morton Deutsch Award for Social Justice. And I'll recognize young Morton Deutsch, who's with us in the front with his lovely wife, Lydia. Mort's always a good applause line. I mention him whenever I need applause. Mort, as many of you know, has studied social justice, I think, since he was 4 years old. He tells a story of being the victim of injustice when he was 4 years old at a summer camp, and they wouldn't, the boys and girls wouldn't let him play softball with him. So when the ball rolled over to him, he grabbed it and took it and threw it in the field so that they couldn't get it. So he's been fighting injustice all his life. And it became a part of his career, a major focus of his career. And this event was inspired around 2002 or 3 when Mort had the idea to understand the gap between the haves and the have-nots that is continually increasing in this world in many manifestations, and organized a kind of small group to have conversations about it and study it. So we had about a 2-year study group trying to study injustice and oppression, and we came to the conclusion that there were very powerful, interesting, compelling theories for why injustice and oppression emerge and why they're so difficult to address. But there wasn't a lot of insight into what to do, so they would sort of describe the phenomenon but not give us a sense of how do you interrupt injustice. So we organized a conference, I think around 2004 or so, that Joanne Page was at, on interrupting injustice and interrupting oppression and sustaining justice is what it was called. And it was a group of activists and philanthropists and academics who were interested in this. And one of the things that came out of that was this event, where we thought it might be beneficial to every year celebrate students who are thinking and working in this area and who innovate and write papers and develop projects that are particularly influential in this area, and what we call distinguished scholar practitioners, who are really beacons, who are doing extraordinary work out there. We wanted to celebrate that work and then further incentivize that work. So we've had, this is our 11th year, we've had many recipients. Michelle Fine, who many of you know, is a distinguished professor of psychology at City University and a former student of Mort's. Jeff Canada was a recipient. Mahjarine Banaj, who is a professor at Harvard University, studies implicit attitudes. John Jost, professor of psychology at NYU, who is big in the field of social justice research. One year we brought Janusz Rakowski and Janusz Jalak, who are two Polish social psychologists who are involved in the nonviolent transition in Poland from communism to democracy, largely influenced by the work of Mort because one of them had been here and studied it. Sister Elaine Roulet, who has founded multiple programs that connected incarcerated parents with their children at Bedford Hills. Claude Steele, who's a social psychologist and was provost of Columbia at the time. Erwin Staub. Jean Sharp, an eminent activist in nonviolence. Gretchen Buchenholz, who's the founder, executive director of the Association to Benefit Children, an extraordinary organization in New York City. And then last year, Abigail Disney, who is a filmmaker and a philanthropist and is a renowned activist for women and peace. And I have to plug her new movie because it opens this weekend at Tribeca. It's called The Armor of Light, and it is about how guns and the evangelical community and the right to life community have kind of collapsed, and what some conversations can do to start to sort of separate those issues. It's an extremely powerful, very provocative film. But that comes out this weekend. But tonight, we will add to this distinguished list the Fortune Society, which is really one of the brightest lights for fighting for and serving formerly incarcerated individuals in critical and innovative ways. And so Claudia will introduce them and celebrate them, and we'll all then break for wine and cheese and things in the other room. And in addition to this list of greats that we've celebrated, there's been an extraordinarily impressive group of the best and brightest graduate student papers. And so we have the most recent graduate student recipient of the award as well. So I think that's it. What we'll do is Claudia will introduce the process of the selection of the paper, and then introduce this year's recipient of the Student Paper Award. Then Claudia will introduce the Fortune Society, because she's been actively working with them for several years and is intimately involved in the organization. So Claudia Cohen is the Associate Director of the ICCCR, the Morton Deutsch International Center of Cooperation. Conflict Resolution, is a senior lecturer at Teachers College at Columbia, and is my partner in crime at the center. So please welcome her, who will welcome everybody else.
Thank you, Peter. Am I holding it correctly? Can you hear me? Okay, great. I am really excited. First, I'm going to give you a little background, a little more than Peter did, on the graduate student paper and the process by which we select the recipient of this honor. And I'm delighted that at least one of our panelists is in the audience. So, as Peter alluded to, the Deutsch Awards are designed to promote innovative scholarship and practice in the area of social justice. The Graduate Student Award recognizes a student paper related to social justice, and these come from a wide range of disciplines. In evaluating the papers, we look for a clear conceptual framework, sound analysis, innovative thinking, and perhaps most importantly, recommendations for remedying the conditions that are impacted by social inequities. Our panel of reviewers this year consisted of Jessica Bain, who's the concentration coordinator of Columbia's School of International and Professional Affairs, Professor Alexander Carter, JD, who directs the Mediation Center at Columbia Law School, and Dr. Janet Gerson, Education Director, she's right here, at the International Institute on Peace Education, and who for a number of years, 2001 to 2010, was co-director of the Peace Education Center at Teachers College. And I believe this is Alex's 5th year of reviewing these papers, so she must like it. And I want to thank all of them for their time and dedication in the process of reading papers. And the best part, I think, is that all students who submit a paper get provided with thoughtful, insightful, specific feedback. So while there's only one winning paper, all who submit a paper are richer for having received the feedback from this distinguished panel. The winning paper was written by Jurka Jelinek. He will receive a check for $500. You'll have to trust us, we don't have it tonight, but I promise you, you'll get it. And a bright, shiny trophy, which we'll reveal to you shortly. Just a couple of words about Yuri before he presents a brief overview of his paper. He's currently pursuing a dual master's degree in international affairs at both Columbia School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA, and Sciences Po in Paris. While at Sciences Po, he focused on human rights and humanitarian affairs. Here at Columbia, he's concentrating on international security and conflict resolution. Prior to this, he studied government and ethnic studies at Harvard. He was born and raised in the Czech Republic, which you'll see reflected in his paper. Yet his passion for seeing new places led him to study in South Africa, to work in Ghana, Haiti, and Nigeria. His academic interests include conflict resolution, minority issues, ethnicity and race, and humanitarian affairs. On top of everything else, he was recently married, and his wife is Haitian American. Yuri's paper is titled Still a Long Way, the Roma and Access to Education in the Czech Republic.
So I would just, once again, would like to say good afternoon to all of you, and thanks for coming. And for me, it is a great pleasure and honor to have been selected and to be able to be here and talk to you a little bit about the paper that I wrote. I would also like to thank the Morton Deutsch International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution for putting this event together. And I would also like to congratulate the real stars of tonight, the Fortune Society, for the achievement that you've received and for all the great work that you've done over the years. And now let us try and get this started. Yes, excellent. So my paper, the topic of the paper is the Roma and access to education in the Czech Republic. And before I actually, well, let me just give you a little bit of a brief background on why, how that actually came into being and how I wrote that paper. So the paper was written last year when I was still at Sciences for a course on human rights that was taught by Ariane, the President Emeritus of the Open Society Foundations. And it was, in a way, a fictional memorandum for a major Czech NGO working on issues affecting the Roma population. And when I say fictional, I put it into little quotation marks because, yeah, it wasn't sent to anyone, but it still deals with real-world issues and attempts to propose real-world solution. And as you can see, the sort of main aim of the paper or the memorandum is to propose a strategy that would help to increase access to mainstream education of the children from the Roma community in the Czech Republic. And again, before I give you the real details of the paper, you might be wondering why I was interested in writing this or how I got where I am right now. And I think here it's important to mention two formative experiences of mine. And while I had actually been interested in issues of diversity and difference for quite some time, it really wasn't until I came to the US when I was able to start understanding the complexities of the issues and also to experience them. And it started obviously in college where I had a great time, it was lovely. And I also made a lot of friends from all different parts of the world. And I was also able to finally dedicate some time to the study of diversity, difference, and these issues, obviously via taking regular classes on these topics, by doing a research on the concept of race in the US, and also by participating in extracurricular activities such as the Sustained Dialogue that maybe some of you might be familiar with. So that was, I would say, the first formative experience. And the second one is when I decided to go study abroad in South Africa, my junior spring, to focus on multiculturalism and human rights. It's a wonderful place, so if you haven't been, I would recommend that you go. But while being there, I had the opportunity to live with the families that was part of the program, to live with the families of the different so-called races/ethnicities. And that was a really great experience. But I also was able to pursue a field research project on interracial couples in Cape Town and their everyday sort of experiences as they live. And I think that these two, living with the families and the project on interracial couples, again, gave me the opportunity to explore these issues in a completely different, yet somewhat similar environment. So I would point out these two. And then I was thinking, well, when I was confronted with the, pick your topic for the paper and the thing that you want to study, that you want to focus on this semester by Professor Neyer, I thought maybe I could draw on these two experiences and focus on something that is a little closer to home. And for me, that was the Czech Republic, because as was mentioned before, I was born and raised in the Czech Republic. I only came to the US after I finished high school, which was at the age of 19. And just to give you a little bit quick background, generally, when it comes to the Roma and the Czech Republic, most people have actually very little direct contact with the Roma population. So most of the ideas that they entertain, that they have about them, come from socialization through regular public discourse. And by that, I mean, talking to friends, acquaintances, and the media, obviously. And unfortunately, the portrait of the Roma is generally very negative, and they are treated as, the typical other. And there I found, in a way, a very sad, but also very representative quotation, I would say, of the kind of opinion that the Czech general population has about the Roma. So it says that it is a quote from, which I find a little bit worse, is from a person who works in education, a teacher, one of the local teachers. And she said, when surveyed, she said the family environment in which the child is growing up is genetically predicted. And then she continues by saying, oh, but we cannot generalize. And then she continues again by saying, but the Roma, they don't want to work. And then she continues, and well, how do I know that? Well, I don't know, I'm not living with them, but I think that's the case. It's my impression. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on in this one particular quote, but sadly, I think it's very representative of the opinion of most of the people in the Czech Republic. Now, the situation, what is really the situation when it comes to the Roma and education in the Czech Republic? In the 1990s and 2000s, a large percentage of the Roma children attended remedial special schools. And in the Czech educational system, it's been changed a little bit, but back in the day, these schools used to be reserved exclusively for people, for students with mild mental disabilities. And in 1999, 18 Roma students challenged this, claiming racial discrimination by the Czech state. And eventually, 8 years later, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in their favor, saying that the Czech Republic actually discriminated against the Roma children based on their racial profile. And ever since, a few reforms have been implemented, so it's been getting slightly better. But again, I think we are still far from the ideal situation where we would like to be. Now, in terms of the gist of the paper, it was, again, as I said, a memorandum to an NGO, so you have to kind of think about that as you look at the structure of the recommendations. And there, I thought that I would divide it into 3 separate parts: the changes that can happen at the levels where they can happen, the argumentative strategies that you can use to persuade the people in power to accept some of these changes, and then the actual 3 priority issues that that particular NGO should focus on. So again, when you analyze it, think about this being directed to a director of a Czech NGO medium size. So they also obviously have certain constraints that they need to work with. In terms of the changes at the 3 level, I think that generally they can be effected at the EU level, the national government level, and the local level. At the EU level, there's been a lot of pressure from the EU and various institutions, and they have been giving us, so to speak, a hard time about that. So generally, there's a lot being done on that level. The national government level, it's similar in the sense that the national government does seem to be fairly willing to work on implementing changes, to coming up with plans and ideas. But where the problem really lies, I think, is the local level, because that's where the implementation happens. But sadly, unfortunately, oftentimes it doesn't really happen too successfully. So I said that the NGO should focus on the local level, because I think that's where the most crucial changes can be effected. Now, if you talk to the local educators or the municipal authorities, how do you actually persuade them? Why should they care? I mean, so what? And there, I think that you can use 3 strategies. The first one is, I think, the one that brings all of us here, which is the normative one. And there you can talk about social justice. You can talk about human rights. But then again, what if you encounter people who are like, yeah, so what? I mean, I don't buy this. I'm not that much into human rights. I mean, why else should I care? So if you encounter those people, I would say you can use the financial argument. Again, looking at it from a perspective of the Czech government, the local officers, the municipal officers, and the educators, if they don't believe in the normative one. The financial one, essentially, there's been a study done which shows very well that the fiscal benefits of the inclusion would far outweigh any sort of investments necessary to actually bridge the gap. So that would be the financial argument. And then you can always use the international one, again, for a government which cares about its international standing and being included in the so-called civilized, community of states. You don't want to be singled out all the time as the bad state that is discriminating against a part of its population. So you could use, ideally a mix of these strategies depending on whom you encounter, and obviously you would be very strategic and tactical. And then what are the actual issues that I think that particular NGO, or, for that matter, anyone else could focus on? And I term these symbolism, Roma sensitization, and increased awareness. And when it comes to symbolism, I thought that it would be good for the Czech government, even though they've acknowledged at times that things are not that right, to sort of release a statement that saying that they are willing to sort of work on this, more of a commitment, a clear, strict commitment, saying, okay, we're aware of this and we're working on this. And then the second thing under the symbolism part, I also suggested that the government should really work on buying off a pig farm, which is in a place called Lety, which is a place where there used to be a concentration camp where a lot of the Roma were actually killed during the Second World War. But as of now, there's a very small memorial, but the rest is occupied by a private pig farm. So obviously this could be something that could be worked on. And then the second part is Roma sensitization. Again, working not necessarily with the national government, but with the local educators, the teachers and the municipal officers on the Roma population, on the culture, on the ways, thinking about creative ways how you can include some of these aspects in the education when it comes to the Roma language, you know, the culture and all these other things. And the third aspect would be increasing awareness amongst the Roma population itself when it comes to the opportunities for educating their children. Because oftentimes the reality is that they don't really, I mean, it's hard for anyone with good education to actually know what kind of levels of schools we have, where they can go, where they can't, why yes, why not. So that is also definitely something that could be worked on in terms of that. And now, that is the last one. So before I depart, I know that all of you really want to hear from the real stars, as I said, of tonight, and enjoy the wine and cheese. But I would also, again, like to take this opportunity to thank the Morten Deutsch International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution for putting this together, for hosting the competition, and also to the judges. At least one of them is here, for setting aside the time to actually read them, and as has been said, to provide us with valuable feedback that really sort of helps when we reflect on the paper. And you know, from my own perspective as a student who's just about to start, hopefully, a job, some kind of a career soon, I think that this is a very unique opportunity to, I mean, for validation of some of our work, an opportunity to engage with some scholars and reflect further on the ideas that we propose, and also an opportunity, more of a boost when it comes to motivation and determination for us to actually try and think about the things we wrote and think about the ways in which these could be actually translated into some real world policy relevant outcomes. So thank you very much for having that. Thank you.
So this is where we show you the bright, shiny object. It's a good photo op. Maybe put it, we'll take it out for a moment. Sure. Yeah. And let's see, if you want to hold that. And it has, your name is engraved. And I will not drop this. So, yeah. So congratulations, and as I said, the check will be in the mail. No pun intended. Should we do a photo op? And Suzanne, come in with the, yeah. Why am I holding that up like, I don't have to say anything.
It's telling me no.
Force?
Say no. We'll do it afterwards.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. So, thank you very much. Let me grab my cheat sheet and... So, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce the 11th Annual Morten Deutsch Awardee for Distinguished Contributions to Social Justice, as you've heard, the Fortune Society. Fortune is being honored for its exemplary practice and policy in the area of criminal justice. By way of introduction to those of you who are not yet familiar with Fortune's work, I want to briefly describe their mission. You may hear a little bit more about this later, and then say a bit about how they realize this mission, which I think is extraordinary. Fortune's mission is to support successful reentry from prison and promote alternatives to incarceration, thus strengthening the fabric of communities. Fortune does this by believing in the power of individuals to change, building lives by service programs shaped by the needs and experiences of Fortune's clients, and changing minds through education and advocacy to promote the creation of a fair, humane, and truly rehabilitative correctional system. David Rothenberg, and you'll be hearing from him shortly, who was then a theatrical publicist and producer, founded Fortune in 1967 along with two formerly incarcerated men. Fortune was named after The Fortune in Men's Eyes, the realistic play about prison life that Rothenberg produced and which brought him together with a community of formerly incarcerated individuals. It strikes me that the collaborative origin story of how Fortune was founded set the mold for the collaborative policies that would follow. To achieve Fortune's vision of a world where all who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated can become positive contributing members of society, they implemented a holistic one-stop model of service provision. They offer a continuum of care, including education, job training, addiction, mental health services, counseling, family reunification, alternatives to incarceration, and more. Harking back to the co-founding with formerly incarcerated men, Fortune's programs are informed and implemented by leaders and staff with the cultural backgrounds and experiences that are similar to those of their clients, the people who know because they've walked that path before. Fortune serves approximately 4,000 men and women annually, and they have 3 NYC locations, drop-in services in Long Island City, Queens, and 2 residential housing programs, the Fortune Academy in Castle Gardens, about 20 blocks north of here. Fortune has been frequently honored by policymakers and institutes, nonprofits, and government organizations for its innovative and impactful work. For example, they were just recently honored by the Society for Ethical Culture with the 2014 Frank B. Prescott Community Service Award. So I think hearing their mission alone and what they do to live it, you would already understand why they meet the Deutsch Award criteria for distinguished contribution to social justice. But I need to say just a couple more things about the extraordinary way in which Fortune achieves its mission, far exceeding the criteria, and incidentally echoing the philosophy and values that are threaded throughout Morton Deutsch's work and the work of the center he created. So just a few quick examples. So consider believing the power of individuals to change. Kurt Lewin, the luminary social psychologist and Mort's advisor, famously stated that individuals behave as a result of the interaction between a core set of personality traits and the attributes of the situations in which they find themselves. While this may not seem like a remarkable observation, it strikes me that many conversations about our criminal justice system assume that a person is forever defined by their worst mistake and not open to change. Second, let's take building service programs shaped by the needs and experience of our clients. Mort's framework for social justice laid the groundwork for his student scholarship in areas such as participatory action research, moral inclusion, and multiculturalism. Shout outs to Michelle Fine, Susan Apatow, and Peter Coleman, to name just a few. Incorporating into our theories of social justice the priorities and wisdom of the lived experiences of those who have walked that path serves as a bridge between what we call theory and practice, theory and research and practice, the creation of knowledge and the application of it in practical ways that serves individuals and communities. And finally, changing minds through education and advocacy to promote the creation of a fair, humane, and truly rehabilitative correctional system. At the MD-ICCCR, we study human systems at multiple levels: the individual, the group, the organization, or cultural system that provides the context. Fortune pursues its vision systematically or systemically, both by providing holistic services for individuals and by addressing societal systems through the work of the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, the DRCPP. Actually, your acronym's about as hard to pronounce as ours. It's advocacy wing. It was founded in 2007, and the DRCPP advocates for the rights and fair treatment of people with criminal records through policy development and advocacy. We're so very fortunate to have 3 brilliant, committed, and extremely accomplished individuals here to accept the award on Fortune's behalf. Even better, they're joined by many members of the Fortune family: executive team, staff, board members, clients. I choose the term family quite intentionally. It is woven through Fortune's culture and its model of support. A characteristic of families, at least the families we wish we had, is lifelong commitment. Whenever you go home, they open the door and give you a big hug. Fortune demonstrates that sort of lifetime commitment to its clients. A client may leave, discontinue using services, and yet is always welcome back. Fortune understands that change is not linear, people stumble, and sometimes they need help finding their footing again. I will say that Fortune's leaders demonstrate their own profound commitment to the Fortune family and its mission, in part through their own longevity. And I got these stats from Sherry, so blame it on her. David, the founder, has been with Fortune 48 years. Joanne, the current CEO and president, 26 years. And Stanley, the senior VP, 21 years. And full disclosure, I get it. I've had the privilege of working with Fortune for almost half a decade, and new projects keep emerging that are too compelling to pass up. Brief bios of David, Joanne, and Stanley are included in your program. There's so much more that could be said, but I want to hand the floor over to them. I will just mention that in terms of recent awards, David Rothenberg was honored by Prison Families Anonymous last year, celebration of their 40th anniversary. The New York Senate commended Joanne Page on the occasion of her designation for special recognition in conjunction with Women's History Month in 2014. That sounds very legislative. I didn't read the number of the legislation. I spared you J389, whatever. And for Stanley, he was awarded last year he was named as a White House Champion of Change around reentry and employment. He was honored as someone who distinguished himself through extraordinary dedication and hard work to help those with criminal records to re-enter society with dignity and viable employment opportunities. So I think we have a brief video in store for us, and then...
I'm often called upon to tell the story of how Fortune began, so I'm starting to feel a lot like Genesis. In the beginning, as they say, in the beginning, it was 1967. I knew nothing about prison. It was 1966, and by a lot of circumstances, produced an off-Broadway prison drama called Fortune in Men's Eyes, and with the cast was invited, the cast insisted that they wanted to visit a jail to authenticate what they had to create as actors, and I visited Rikers Island with the cast. And as I looked around and I watched people being herded, mostly young men, and I said, whatever they're here for, how are they going to be any better as a result of this experience? And it looked like an exercise in futility, which is what I said to a newspaper person when I came out. And that was 48 years ago, and I've visited thousands, well, hundreds of prisons and jails all over the country, all over the world, and I've never changed my mind that the prison experience is an exercise in futility. People go there with problems and they're never confronted. That's what I saw in Rikers. Young people who were there for breaking the law, for having a drug problem, for having a drinking problem, none of it confronted. The play was our mission, and Fortune Society grew literally from the proscenium march at the theater because we started a forum after performances, and men first, eventually women, who had been incarcerated started introducing themselves, and I was hanging out with a lot of guys who had done time, and people, it was the 60s. Does anybody remember the 60s? It was an era when you didn't have to apologize for caring, and people would call me and say, can you bring these guys to our church, our school? And we were going to the colleges and to churches, and we were doing it enough, and I suddenly said, we have the nucleus of an organization. We could educate the public about the prison system, and an enlightened public will change the prison system. Wasn't I naive? And we began in my one-room theater office, and people came in as a result of guys going on radio and television programs, and there was no vision at the beginning. People often say, what was the vision? What we saw was a need. The vision came later. What the need was, people wanted something else. And all the services that Joanne and Stanley will tell you about at Fortune, and which were hinted at in that beautiful little film presentation, the people coming to us identified what their needs were, and that's how Fortune grew. The counseling was obvious, one-on-one, people who had done time talking to people who had done time, with coming out. Job finding was clear. Housing was a necessity. Education was an important part of the reality of job finding. So everything that came out was defined by the needs of the people who came to us. In the very early days, Marty Horn can testify to this, that people coming to us who were on parole were not allowed, they were told that it was a parole violation to come to Fortune Society. That's how bad it was. I went on the radio and said that it's like having an AA meeting and not letting drunks come. And that was determined by the National Council of Crime and Delinquency that set up a meeting with us and Russell Oswald, who was then the commissioner of parole, later became the commissioner of correction. And it was determined that parolees could come to the Fortune Society, but we couldn't socialize. So we called a newspaper man and we went into a restaurant and everybody sat at a different table and we shouted at each other. And we used the media to demonstrate the follies of the system, and that's what we did. We showed that the system was irrelevant to the needs of the men and women that they were incarcerating and who were returning to society. And it grew out of a desperate need for people. And I didn't realize it, but what made Fortune unique was that it was the voice of a silent population. Men and women who had been incarcerated had been a voiceless entity because any speaking out would have endangered their possibility of finding jobs or housing. And so that was a great innovation on our part that we did because it just made sense. And people have often said, what are the qualities at Fortune that has allowed it to endure? And you're all so erudite, and I've heard such profound things, but I think what makes Fortune click is that people care and they laugh. And that's a wonderful combination to walk into a place. I love it when my civilian friends, my former colleagues from the theater, come and visit Fortune, and they're just shocked because they think they're going to be frightened. They think that it's going to be a scary situation. And as I introduce them to people, they say to me afterwards, "What did he do?" As if they can identify someone by the crime they committed. So I usually answer by saying, "What did they do?" "Well, I hope he woke up this morning, took a shower, hopefully, had some breakfast, and came here." No, you know what I mean. And I said, I really don't, because we're not that preoccupied with what people did. We want to know where they're going. And that's Fortune. It's been that way since the beginning. And the legacy that I often hear would not have taken place. I was at Fortune for 18 years, and none of it, and I'm proud of my participation because I did some groundwork. But none of you would be here if the extraordinary work of the people that came after me, Joanne Page and Stanley Richards, have done things that we only talked about and dreamed about. The castle. We talked, what the castle was in the beginning was my couch, Kenny Jackson's couch, Fran O'Leary's couch. That's where people stayed when they came out because there was no castle. They dreamed it, they founded it, they built it, and it exists. But all of their work, so I'm the old man, I come back now. I used to say I want to come back with my cane and just walk around, and that's where I am now. And I just want to, just one thing, that this week I was asked to be, do you know what Sirius Radio is? I didn't know what it was until I was on this week. It goes in cars. Do you know what it is?
Yes.
And I was asked to be interviewed, and then they asked for callers. And a woman called from Massachusetts, and she said, in 1970, you came to Emerson College with Mel Rivers and Kenny Jackson and Charlie McGregor. She remembered their names, and I said, yes, that's right. And she said, I changed my major and my career plans, and I've been working for the last 35 years with young women in trouble. And thank you, Fortune Society, for that. And that's a legacy of which I am so proud.
So people talk about founder syndrome and how hard it is to be the person following a charismatic founder. And I'm so privileged because I get to follow this charismatic founder. And we have a partnership. We worked it out when David came back. He's now emailing as of last week. It's a major big deal. But he came and said, I'd like to volunteer. And we figured out what the roles were. And the joke is, I'm the parent, and I'm responsible for feeding and diapering the kid, and he gets to be the grandparent. and enjoy the kid. And so he gets to take our clients out to the theater and watch them while they're watching their first play. But I was a volunteer at Fortune when I was in law school. And I learned about Fortune in 1972 when I started doing volunteer work in our local jail and upstate prisons when I was 18, and it shaped the rest of my life. And I feel incredibly privileged. Later, 2 weeks from now, I think, May 5th, is the 70th anniversary of my dad's liberation from concentration camp. It's not accidental that I've been doing work in prison, because if you care about issues of social justice, if you care about racism, if you care about bias, if you care about what happened to the Roma, if you care about what it takes when you treat people as less than human and then can do anything you want to them, the place in our country to be is working in prisons, working in the so-called criminal justice system. I know something that I know in my bones from my background, and that is that ordinary human beings are capable of the worst evil you can imagine and the greatest beauty, and that it's in each of us. And one can feed either of those. And most people go with the flow, and they go with what's fed. So prisons feed the worst in people, and some people triumph over that. What Fortune is and should be is where you walk in the door and people look in your eyes and see the best you're capable of being and work to tug it out of you. And we have an extraordinary group of people at Fortune, many of whom experience the same thing that our clients did, almost all of whom are really passionate about the work. And it's an extraordinary privilege to be part of that kind of community. So we're an advocacy organization, because if you do the work to help people rebuild their lives, you damn well better be doing the work that's set at very capably destroying those lives. But we're also a community, and much of what happens that matters happens in ways that aren't about job and aren't about role, but are really about how one human being treats another. And Stan and I do a new staff breakfast whenever we have enough new staff. And one of us always says, if it was your mother or your brother or your child in trouble looking for help, how would you want them treated? And if you start from that, you can pretty much figure out a lot of the other stuff. So it's a kind of magical place because we get to see people change. And the castle is the most special place for me because I get to see people walk in with the prison face. And then I get to see them melt a little bit around the edges when they start feeling safe, and get to see that first smile happen, and get to see them be the people who welcomes the next new person in. When we have a long and deep relationship with Columbia and with what you've created, and we have been using Kenneth Soul, one of your students, as a resource for building the soul of our organization, no pun unintended, for maybe 20 years, maybe longer. And through that we met Eric Marcus, and through that we met Peter, and through that we met Claudia. And when we were talking about doing a participatory action research piece, what we talked about is that what we do at the castle, and we do it at Fortune all over, but at the castle is our most intense version of it. What we do is we have people walk in the door who've come out of never knowing anything but violence. And we say, this is a place where no violence, no threat of violence is allowed. And what we needed to have was a culture strong enough that somebody coming out of Clinton Correctional Facility, somebody coming out of Sing Sing, somebody coming out of Rikers, somebody coming out of the Bellevue Men's Shelter would walk in, and the first time there was any tension, and there's always tension, would know that this is a place where you got to figure out some other way of doing it than violence. And we were told when we started, don't ever take anybody with a violent history. And that's mostly who's in our house. But we have one of the safest places, I think, in the country. And so when we asked Claudia to do a study, a piece of research, we asked her to focus on how we've created a culture of nonviolence that is powerful enough that when somebody who's known almost nothing but violence walks in the door, they know they're in a different place. So Columbia has been a huge contributor to the culture of our place and to what works. And I am privileged because I've been at Fortune 26 years now. I get to learn from David, and I get to learn from Stanley. And together we add up to more than 100 years of Fortune, and we're a hell of a team. So, David asked me to tell a quick story, and I will, because I often do what David tells me to do. So, this actually was a piece of writing that was on the door of one of our teachers at the castle, and it goes something like this. A Cherokee elder was talking to his grandson and said, "There's a wolf in each of us. There's the wolf that is the wolf of evil, the wolf of terror, the wolf of tearing up people. And there's the wolf that's about caring and about love and about building." And the grandson said, "Those wolves are always at war, right?" And he said, "Yes." "Which wolf wins?" "It's the wolf you feed."
That's right. I love that story.
Yeah.
You know, I was just thinking about how special Fortune is. You know, 31 years ago, I was in a cell thinking about how to live in that environment. I was thinking about that cell being my life, that cell being part of my experience. And then I went to school, and it changed. And I started thinking about just maybe I could do something different, that cell didn't have to be my life, that prison didn't have to be my life, crime didn't have to be my life. And then I was released. And I came home, and I was applying to every organization. Because when I was incarcerated, I worked in the pre-release center. I was the director of pre-release. And I was able to help people prepare for the parole board and get out. And I couldn't get out, but I helped others get out. And when I came home, nobody wanted to give me an opportunity. Nobody said, "We're willing to take a risk on you." And then I met Joanne. I applied for a job at Fortune as a counselor in 1991. And Joanne gave me the opportunity to not only give back, but to build a life and to build the future for myself and for my community. And for that, Joanne, you know I will always be thankful to you. And the special place about Fortune is there are many, many people in prison who don't believe that life will amount to anything but the cycling in and out of prison and jail. And what David created by creating Fortune is creating a place for people to just, for a moment, when they get out, come to a place that will see the beauty in you and not see what you did. See the hope in you and not see all your failures. And at Fortune, that's what we do. We see the beauty in people. I see many of the men and women who reside at the castle in the room, and it just warms my heart to know that they might have walked in not sure what to expect, not really knowing what to do with their life, but 2 minutes in, begin to believe that life could be different. 2 hours in, begin to work and making life a different place for them, a different experience for themselves. And that's what Fortune's about. Fortune is a place where people can genuinely build new lives. And I have been honored for 21 years to be part of such a special place, a place that I've seen many people come through and just build new lives. So I want to thank you for honoring Fortune, which means you're honoring David, Joanne. I want to thank you, Mort, for creating a center that allows people to celebrate somebody's beauty rather than tearing them down. So I want to thank you. And I also want to thank, people like Marty, who have been fighting this fight for a very, very long time as a parole officer, who've been caring about people and daring to see the beauty in them when it wasn't a popular thing. but you cared to see the beauty in people. I want to thank you for that, Marty. It's special. And then I want to thank all of you, because there are thousands and thousands of men and women who are in prison right now, not believing that people care, not believing that things could ever be different for them. And I know when I first came home, I used to go to conferences, and I said, I wish I could film it, I wish I could bottle it, I wish I could show it to the men and women who are in those cells, about how many people in this community care about what happens to them and care about how they experience themselves when they get released. It is a very powerful thing. And I just want to thank you all for coming tonight and to being part of this special, special evening. Thank you. Absolutely.
I vowed that I was going to tell this story, and of course I forgot it. And that was, and I think this tells Fortune about when I was at Fortune 30 years ago, a guy named Fletcher Alston came out of prison, and the woman at the desk said, "Welcome home, baby," and hugged him, and he went, "Ugh." And he went and talked to a counselor, and he went out and he said, "This place is not for me." And he went out and did what he had to do, and he ended up in the penitentiary, and he was sitting in a cell, as he told me years later. And when he came out, well, he was sitting in his cell saying, "I can't do this anymore. What am I going to do?" And then he said, "I'll go back to the place where that lady hugged me." That's the story of Fortune.
We have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions, and we don't want to keep you from the wine and goodies for too long. But you didn't hear about that? But if maybe a couple of folks want to say something or ask a question.
This group, I think you're doing something so important, and it's so vital, not only to the ex-criminals, but to the society, to think this way, to think about caring for the baby who comes out of a womb of a woman who is in poverty, not well educated, to think about a caring society. And that's what you've done. You've created a caring society, and I hope your message gets spread widely throughout the land. We need it desperately.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mr. Cunningham, and I'm a new arrival that came home from prison. And I just want to thank the Fortune Society for allowing me to be there. And when I did come there and I did arrive there, I had a crying moment because I appreciate the surroundings there at Fortune Society, the people and the opportunity in order for me to build a new life. I was going in and out of prison for some time and disappointing myself and disappointing my family. But now, last weekend, I went to a scholarship luncheon that my mother always coordinates, and then my uncle came and stood next to me. He said, "Don't you see that smile on your mother's face? Don't you ever take that smile off your mother's face and go back to prison." And thank you, Fortune Society, for that.
I think you may be the last word.
Thank you. Good evening to all. My name is Richard Cobbs, and I too am a member of Fortune Society. I've been there for some time. The most important thing that Fortune has done for me, right? Stan, Joanne, David, they taught me how to love myself. You know, and I still thrive with that today. So again, Stan, Joanne, and David, thank you very much for teaching me how to love me. And that's what Fortune Society is truly about, teaching people how to love themselves.
Before I hand the mic over to Peter, who's going to provide the award, I'd like to acknowledge that there are several people in the room who have been, we talked about participatory action research, and we don't have the time to describe that for people that aren't familiar with it, but it means that a group of students and myself and other staff members had the opportunity to work alongside clients of Fortune so that we could experience and staff, their lived experiences and what they knew about the phenomenon as we tried to help, as Joanne said, describe what it is that's special about the culture that makes Fortune what you've just heard. So those of you who are on the PAR team at any time, if you wouldn't mind standing up, would that be, can I? Yeah. Great, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Oh.
This is your award. It's heavy and large, but
And they can carry.
the box is cool too.
We thought about getting 3, but Sherry said you guys could share. So I hope that's the right answer.
May I say something? Of course. When you work with one human being, you have the whole world in your hands.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. This is so inspiring and moving and powerful and hopeful. And as Mort said, we do hope that this is an audience of people that will replicate. And there's a contagiousness to what you do. And so we hope that this opportunity to celebrate you can allow that to spread. Thank you all so much.
Yes, 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 yes.